How's it going, Brother Junior Warden?
How's it going, Brother Worshipful Master?
Oh, jeez. Nope. Can't hear that yet.
Doesn't feel real.
Doesn't feel real yet.
But it is real.
It is, unfortunately, as of yesterday, actually. Recording the day after installation. Whose idea was that?
I think it was your idea, Worshipful Master.
Probably was. Sounds like something I would do.
But yeah, I mean, it's not going to feel real, I think, until our first state of communication next week. And then you're going to be sitting in your cozy chair. Yeah. You're going to have your big gavel.
Right. And the traveling gavel that hopefully somebody will come steal. In fact, the day this podcast comes out would be the night of that meeting where somebody could come get the traveling gavel.
I did put out like a warning to all lodges, like a come and get it type of message on Facebook. And I called out Lincoln Lodge specifically because we went out to the sticks once for them to go get it. So I'm trying to drag them out over to us from the falls.
We went out and we gave it to them.
Oh, that's right.
Yep. So if nobody comes Thursday, we're going to have to go somewhere and give it away again.
And it could be anywhere. You know what's worse than having something predictable? Having something unpredictable happen. Show up right at your lodge.
Right.
No one is safe.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, do you feel different?
No. I feel like me. I feel like the installation went really well yesterday. I think, we've talked before about Masonry being really good at public speaking stuff because of confidence. I always hated having a microphone in front of my face. The podcast, I think, helped with that yesterday. So that was good, but I think it was a really good ceremony yesterday. I think everybody enjoyed it, and we had a lot of fun.
You did look really confident up there, not to toot your horn for you, but you could tell the difference the public speaking had made even from a couple of years ago for you, coming up in front of a room that was pretty filled out with people too, and just going right after it.
Yep, and just got to work right away. And, it was really fun to do it the way I did it, with me getting installed first and then kicking the installing master out of the east and taking over and installing the rest of my line.
Yeah, even my wife was saying afterwards, she's like, I really liked how Matt did that because it's kind of nice having the person who's going to be taking charge kind of talk person to every member of his team right at the get-go and be like, this is your job, this is what I respect about you. And you added a lot of ad hoc stuff too, like, you kind of really motivated people and thanked them and then gave them their new responsibilities, which was pretty cool. Yep,
I had my little secret script hidden on the podium that nobody knew about. None of you guys knew you were getting a little personal message before I installed you into your office.
And as expected, Jeff cried like a baby, and I know he listened, so I want everyone to know he's not as scary as you think he is all the time.
Yeah, well, that speaks to the closeness of the line we have, though, and yep. I think that's a big chunk of the reason that we're successful. So,
yeah, it's very cool, but we could talk about installation all day, but I think on the next podcast, since we're going to do a year-end wrap-up, it'll probably come up in there anyway, so I think maybe we should kick it over to our special guest.
Yeah, we should probably run the intro and bring our guest in.
Let's get some music.
Loosen up your ties and roll up your sleeves. It's time for Fellowship with Matt and Andrew. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin or any other Grand Lodge or any appended body.
All right. Well, on today's episode, we have a very special guest. We have Worshipful Brother Pat Cholka with us, who's a member of many lodges and heavily involved in Masonic education and has worn a lot of different hats in both local lodges and the Grand Lodge level. So welcome, Pat.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yep, we're really excited. You were one of the people when we put down the list, we were trying to figure out who would be good people to put on, and we just kind of make a big list, and so we can pull from that, as we go along and see let's see if this person's available or whatever. And when we put you on the list, I was like, this would be a cool podcast. So I'm happy we were able to steal you for a little bit.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So we like to usually kick this off with a easy question just to get people filled in. How did you become interested in Freemasonry? Why are you here? Why do you stick around? Kind of, what's your story with that?
So How I got interested in Freemasonry is a really, really long, complicated story. But it really started in 2003. I had a very good friend of mine that is a member at Henry L. Palmer Lodge, and he got me interested. When I first started meeting some of the guys down there, I realized that there was just something missing. Something, I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something that was missing. And in talking to the guys down there, I realized that maybe what Freemasonry provided is what was missing, and went and got my degrees, and lo and behold, it helped. It helped a lot. It didn't fill the hole completely, but it, 75, 80% of the way there, and the rest I've been working on my own. In terms of why I'm here, just something about this fraternity really resonates with me. And sitting here with brothers like you and being able to talk, that makes it all worth it.
It is interesting how you'll notice, I was thinking about this the other day, that it's interesting that when I'm looking at authors of Masonic books, and then I look up what their day jobs are, and they'll be like, this guy wrote this 300-page book and he's a farmer. And you're like, wait, what is inspiring these people to want to do something creative, or they want to say something or contribute to the, I guess I could say the lore, but the study or the understanding of Freemasonry. And it's not just like you would expect. Someone's an author, they're going to write books. Someone's, a highly educated teacher, he's going to write a book. It's just like, this guy's a youth pastor, he's going to write a book. And you're like, this guy's a grocery bagger, he decided to write a short book. And you're like, what is going on in this fraternity that is drawing people where you would kind of typecast them into a certain type of role? You'd be like, oh, you're a farmer, you're probably not going to write a book. But then through the interaction with Masonry, they're like, I can actually participate in these types of spaces, which I've always thought was really interesting.
Absolutely. There's a lot of, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody that knows me how important Masonic education is to me. In particular, the idea of applied Freemasonry, taking what Freemasonry has in its ritual and applying it to your life. And I've always felt that if I could have a way to do that and inspire any other Mason to think about what's in this ritual a little bit differently and figure out how to apply it to his own life, then it would be a success. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what's always driven me all these years from an education standpoint.
Well, and it's super helpful, and I think it's actually what a lot of younger Masons are actually looking for coming into the fraternity, and not that other older Masons aren't also craving that as well. It's obviously going both ways, but I notice that a lot of guys coming in, they really want to know how to take out of our ceremonies the actual value.
Absolutely.
And that's part of our value prompt. So I think it's paramount that we have educators making education that's accessible and easy to follow for people from various backgrounds to actually get value, which is always, those are my favorite educations to read too. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'll read a Rage's poem or a manuscript here and there that's dry and kind of hard to place together, but am I having as much fun reading that? I don't know.
Those are the ones where if you're not in the right frame of mind to be reading it, the eyes start to get heavy as you're reading it, and you read the same sentence 12 times, and you're like, all right, I just got to put this thing down right now. I agree, though, and I've always found it, not that Masons of any different kind of background can't become heavily involved in the fraternity and want to be involved in the fraternity, but you always hear the talks about like guys who, now we call it the Day of Light, who go through the Day of Light, and people are always like, well, are they really going to be involved in the fraternity, and all these other questions that surround that, and that people, I don't want to say look down upon the Day of Light for, but they don't see it as the traditional and proper way to, do it. And you are like the example of somebody who's gone the complete opposite direction, having received your degrees at Man Mason, and you are so heavily involved in the fraternity and so self-driven and education-based and everything else. I think you are the person that is the exception to what people expect the rule of Day of Light to be, and a testament to how, regardless of whether you do it the traditional way or, one-day class, it's all about how much time and effort you choose and want to put into the fraternity.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. The one-day class was, me going through a one-day class was kind of by accident. It's a kind of a funny story. The guy that got me interested in Freemasonry, his name is Tim Kloss, he scared me away from the memory work. Oh, the memory work's so difficult, it's so hard, it's not everybody can do it well. But we have this opportunity coming up for you where you can do it in one day and you don't have to do any memory work. Oh, great, where do I sign? I couldn't sign up fast enough. And went through the one-day class. It was actually when Mike DeWolf was Grandmaster. Went through the one-day class and went back to my lodge, and that's when I realized that I still had a responsibility to still post in this. So I worked with our counselor at the time, and there was just working on the obligations alone, there was just something about the ritual work and the way it was worded that inspired me and connected me. I think it was the idea that I could read the words that were printed here, or I could learn the words as they were told to me, or what have you. But to develop a meaning, I had to do that on my own. Mm-hmm. To understand what I'm doing, what I'm talking about, I had to develop that meaning on my own. And I think that's what really connected me to it. And even now, when you look back at the ritual, there are so many things that are, I don't want to say hidden in there, but there are so many things that aren't obvious.
Right.
That when you sit down and you think about it, it really helps connect all of those dots.
Right. I had to giggle a little bit there with the fact that, somebody, and obviously he would have had no way of knowing, but that he tried to scare you away a little bit because of the memory work, and you know more ritual than 90% of Masons. I mean, you can do so many different parts and and you're awesome at it all. So it's impressive that way. That being said, if you had the opportunity to go back, would you do a one-day class or would you do it the other way?
So I always said that I would, if I had a chance, if I had to do it again, I would do it differently. I would go the traditional way. But then the Grand Lodge put out Day of Light, and the education focus in the Day of Light, I think, made a very big difference in the one-day class. And to answer your question, if I went through it again today with the Day of Light, the way it was written, very education-based and so on, I'd have no qualms going through it again, going through it that way.
Right on. As you know, I've been involved in a few of those.
Yeah, one or two, I think.
Yeah, and I've always kind of struggled with how I feel about them, just from an initiatic experience perspective. And Andrew and I have had lengthy conversations about, I boil it down to, I feel like sometimes they're a necessary evil. You get guys with busy schedules or, various other things that would cause them to be better suited to go through a one-day class than go through them all the other way, or if a lodge just can't fill out a degree team, stuff like that. There's reasons for them to be used. However, and great Masons come out of it, I don't see that there's really any difference in their retention rate between bringing somebody through the traditional way versus a one-day class. It's kind of like if guys want to be around and they're enjoying this, they're going to be around and continue to enjoy it. So I like it. I like the way it's more education focused. It is a long day. It's a long day, but I don't see them as a terrible thing. I just think they need to be used sparingly.
I've kind of always fallen into I heard a brother gentleman the other day say, when I told them I went through the traditional method, they were like, "Are you serious, really?" And I was like, "Whoa, hold on." I like the way that they do have made the quality of the Day of Light so much higher, and the education, the breakout sessions are really cool, and you can get some really smart brothers all in the room at the same time, which is awesome. But I always have a hard time with it based on when I've participated in them. At the end, sometimes I'll meet these new candidates going through, and they're like really cool dudes. And I'm like, man, I wish I could have just dragged you into my lodge and made you go through it the slow, low way. And there's pros and cons to both, but I think there's something really special about the bonds that are created in the slow traditional method with your mentor and meeting, and you have to meet with the lodge and you have to hang out with these guys for months. And I think it really ingrains a sense of camaraderie with your mother lodge as your home. And when you do the Day of Light or the one-day class method, you have to supplement that yourself afterwards. It's not going to be kind of it's not going to be inculcated within the method. It puts a lot more responsibility on the individual with less hand-holding to be like, you got it. Now you have to figure it out. And, that's fine. But, depending on the person, I think that the traditional method lends itself to fostering that in its own, the way it kind of is put on and the way we do it. Whereas in the other way, it's kind of putting a lot of onus on the individual, which, that can have pros and cons too.
Right.
In the Day of Light, in my opinion, you have to foster that habit from the candidate, the brother that comes through the Day of Light. You have to foster that habit to him to come to lodge, right? Mm-hmm. Where if you go through the traditional way, I think you're all by virtue of going through the traditional degrees and coming to lodge for posting and education and everything else, I think you're fostering that habit along the way. So the Day of Light actually becomes a lot more work for a lodge to bring that guy in and get that guy involved than it does bring through the traditional way. Does that make sense? Even though it's going through the traditional way, you have to staff degrees and make sure you have all the lectures covered and all that stuff. But aside from that, just by getting the candidate involved or getting that new brother involved, it creates a lot more work for the lodge.
Yeah, it puts a lot of ownership on the lodge. Big. When you're going through the degrees, you have to mentor them because you want to progress to the next degree. So you're not going to forget about the person because that's when people are going through the degrees for that 1 year, year and a half. That's like they're the star of the show. Like everyone in lodge is like, that's the guy. We got to keep him moving, keep him working. So there's a lot of attention that comes with that. And you'll find that when you get become a master mason, suddenly everyone's like, all right, you're the brother now, get to work. And then you're like, okay. And so it's like ideally you have a mentor who will keep pushing you and keep helping you. And, we have lots of mentors in lodges that everyone participates in, but it does put a lot of extra, all because they got their degree, the work's not done. Right. And that is something that's hard because it's not as tangible as a timeline where it's on a calendar. We got to keep them mentored, keep them pushed. It's just like, no, now you have to kind of supplement that. And I talked to a handful of guys who had just went through the one-day class, and they were saying they want to do all the posting in all 3 degrees. So they took the onus upon themselves, and the lodge like, yeah, you can do that. And he's like, I want to do it in open lodge because they were like, now they can on the back end get that same time they could have got the traditional way, which I think is really cool and a great way to kind of get a little bit of best of both worlds in there too.
Yeah. No, that would be awesome if, especially if a lot of guys would choose to do that or, even just put the work on themselves like so many of us have done to educate ourselves more. And I think education's a two-way street when it comes to that kind of stuff, right? The person has to be interested in doing it for themselves and maybe has to have somebody that can help mentor them along the way too. Like, this is a really good book. If you want to start getting into it, start here.
I'm always forcing books down people's throats. Every new Mason that becomes a master Mason, I hand them a copy of The Meaning of Masonry by Wilmhurst. Sure. Let's go. All right, time for you to get weird with it.
Have fun.
What would be one piece of advice you would give to a new Master Mason, whether it's traditional way or through the Day of Light, during their first couple of months as a newly made Master Mason?
Absorb. Be a sponge. Remember that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? Listen. There's a lot more to learn about lodge than the ritual. You have the individual lodge customs. You have all of those things that you have to learn as well, right? And you have to choose to fit in. No one's going to make you fit in. No one's going to make you be comfortable in your lodge. That's a choice that you have to make. Maybe you have to lower your guard. Maybe you have to be a little more extroverted than you normally would be, whatever the case may be. You have to find that way. Whatever that is, you have to find it on your own. No one can find it for you. Not to get all preachy or nothing, but my dad is a recovered alcoholic, and one of the things they always say about an alcoholic is you can't force an alcoholic to stop drinking, right? Well, same thing goes with Masonry. You can't force a Mason to want to learn something. He's got to find that groove, find that path that works for him. And I would just encourage him to find that, one way or the other. Sit down with some guys, some people that he respects. Maybe, meet somebody from another lodge that's of the same age group or same generation or has a similar interest, and find that way to fit in.
Yeah, and I think we've all experienced this. When you're first a Mason, there's a lot of people in a room that you don't know.
Yeah, lots.
And your first couple of months are kind of uncomfortable because these are your brothers, but they're also kind of strangers. And, I've always told my candidates when I'm mentoring them, I give them seating instructions during dinner so they can't just sit with the one person they always sit with. I try to move them around and be like, you're going to talk with, some old past master today. You're going to sit down because ultimately it might be uncomfortable in the moment. But in the long term, it's where you really build that family where you are shaking everyone's hand when they come in the door because you know them all. And that's where the only way, I think, to really get through becoming a part of any group, really.
I would agree. I agree.
All right, I got a hard hitter for you.
Okay.
So, I was reading one of your education pieces on the forgotten virtue within the journal this month. It's a really good piece, and it was kind of dealing with the fact that within a lot of parts of our ritual, it's not explicitly mentioned, but balance is kind of hidden as an undertone within a variety of our symbols, whether it's like checkered floor or the level or the compasses, point within a circle.
Right.
You could throw temperance on that list too.
Absolutely.
What other hidden virtues do you think we have within our ritual? Me and Matt always like to harp on civility as being one that should be it's kind of undertoned within a lot of things. Are there any other ones that you think are kind of sitting there that really are helpful for Masons to kind of be brought into their consciousness?
Tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Tolerance is another big one, right? We're all different. We're necessarily different. We have to be tolerant of each other's flaws. We have to be tolerant of each other's personalities. We have to be tolerant of each other's way of thinking. It's through that tolerance that the bonds of brotherhood really are established, right? Acceptance is another one. We have to accept our brothers for who they are, whether they're, you mentioned earlier, whether they're a ditch digger or they're a high-level politician, right? We have to accept where they come from, what they've learned, what they understand in life, and how they can apply that to Masonry.
I think that's a huge one that is starting to come to the right now because everyone's so high-strung on what makes people different. And since it's a common topic that's really popular right now in the public, it starts to leak into Freemasonry a little bit, where I'm seeing some people start to lean a little less tolerant. And I think it's an important time as Masons to kind of reestablish that, like, hey, we all are breaking bread together in this room, and we have to find common ground. We need to find a level. If it's not there, we need to make it, and make it there pretty quick.
I think it is interesting with all the division that's going on in the world and how we're kind of being corralled into being divided, essentially. Like, we're being led down that road by media and other kinds of stuff like that. I find it very interesting to go sit in a lodge room where none of that matters. And I mean, yeah, you'll have a couple of brothers that are maybe a little less tolerant, but I think tolerance has become more important in the lodge room and more to the forefront because that's the place where we absolutely have to do it.
Yep, and we're seeing a lot more diversity in membership too.
Right.
People are joining the fraternity from a variety of different faiths, more than ever, probably, in Wisconsin at least. On our altar we have the way we have 4 holy writings out, but the way that we do it is, for the sake of tolerance, the book that's open is the holy writings of the master. We say the master is the one who's presiding. He's the one you can't cross from because he needs to see it. So as a way to try to be like mutual respect, we just have the other books sitting there closed based on membership. And honestly, it got too hard to remember who was what, so we just put them all out and just set them on the thing. They're here.
Right.
This pertains to you. Good. It's represented because if Masonry wants to move forward, it has to create an environment that's inviting to men who are good men regardless of what other weird divisions we want to put on that. And, when you build that into the culture and infrastructure of the lodge, if someone comes from faith that's less common, but they see it's being given its head nod, it's a lot easier for them to be like, oh, I think I can probably fit in this space. They don't hate me based on something arbitrary. They just are looking for good men. And, that's immensely helpful. And it's really kind of a refreshing space, like you were saying, to hang out in, when you're constantly dealing with a world that wants you to find division, to sit in a world that asks you to set it aside.
Politics today is a huge thing in social media, personal interactions with other people and so on, right? These political divisions that exist between men is natural. It's going to happen. What Matt said, I think, is spot on, right? the lodge is supposed to be this lodge room is supposed to be a safe place. But where a lot of people get, in my opinion, where a lot of people get twisted is I only have to abide by that while I'm in the lodge room, right? And Masonry happens every day. Every day. We hold a state of communication. We do the things that are necessary by being a lodge chartered under the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin. We do that in the lodge room. Masonry in and of itself doesn't just happen in the lodge room, right? It's not our responsibility, again, in my opinion, it's not our responsibility to understand the things written in the cipher or in our ritual while we're in the lodge room. We have to understand that outside of a lodge room, right? We've all been in lodge meetings where a committee has been assigned and the committee waits to do anything until they get inside the lodge room. Then when the master asks, what are we doing about this pancake breakfast? Well, and the pancake breakfast committee gets up and says, well, I want to also have sausage. Well, we have to have bacon too. And I want to charge this much. Well, we shouldn't charge anything for our widows. Okay, and that discussion happens in the lodge room, right? That should happen outside of it. The same thing applies to working on understanding the ritual and working towards understanding what Masonry expects of the individual Mason, right? We don't just do that during a degree. We shouldn't understand what the entered apprentice degree is just during the conferral of an entered apprentice degree. We have to spend some time and work on understanding. I'm going to tie this back, Andrew, to what you mentioned about books. I think 3 of the most important books that should be given to every new Mason that is often misunderstood are Claudi's Introduction to Masonry in the EA, the FC, and the MM, because it covers so much additional information, and they're easy reads. Oh, yeah. If I can read it, anybody can read it. And I think that, that sort of thing will do nothing more but help grow Masonry, help Masonry understand who it is by way of the individual Mason, of course.
Yep.
It's also nice with those Cloudy books because they are short reads. It's like a nice intro to reading too, where you're like, hey, you might have not picked up a book in a while, so I'm not going to give you a 300-page book right now and be like, dude, read this. So it's a nice one to kind of reinvigorate a passion for learning with something small, like a little appetizer. And you're like, this will give you more and a little bit more explanation. It's similar to getting a long version of the lecture at the end that explains it, but just with more.
Right.
And, we have a handful of copies of it in our library that I always give with the posting book and be like, when you're done with the posting book, read this and bring it back. Because honestly, it's an easy ask to be like, start with this, and then you can get them into some more, there's endless Masonic reading if you want it. So,
right. Yeah, there's way too many books out there sometimes.
Yep.
And sometimes it's hard to suss out, unless you start reading one, who's actually competent and at being the author of a book and is offering something of value in that book. Because there's plenty of times where I've picked up a book and I've been like, I don't think this guy actually knew what he was talking about when he wrote it.
But that's the fun of reading. It's up to you to kind of critically analyze and go, ooh. But actually, you can kind of learn from disagreeing too and be like, right. I think I would think this, and then you're learning through criticism, I guess.
Right. And what Pat was saying about the committee's meeting, during a stated meeting, the whole point of having a committee is to not take up all that time in the stated meeting, right? So I'm 100% on board with you, but yes, guys, forget that those conversations can be had civilly outside of the lodge room. And I've said it before that Masonry, if we actually look at it, we should be the ones, Freemasons with each other, should be the ones that can set the example for how to have difficult conversations, still love each other at the end of the day, and not dive down into name calling and stuff like that.
Right.
Regardless of what the topic is.
And I like to imagine going to lodge just like going to the dojo. You're like, I'm going here to practice things in a safer place with people who are also trying to practice those things. So when I leave, I can take it out into a world where people are potentially not trying to practice those things. So it's like a safe place to train to be a Mason when you're at lodge and say, hey, if you can try to avoid creating divisions and disharmony here, maybe you can do that in your day-to-day life too. And that's the thing is, you don't stop being Masons when you walk out of your lodge room. And it's like people like to think that Masonry is something you do, like a hobby. Like, I go in and go to my things and I hang out with the guys and I do this, but Masonry at its heart is really a lifestyle more than something you do. It's something you live. And you could be a Mason who hasn't been to lodge in 20 years and still live like a Mason, and that doesn't make you less of a Mason. It just means you're not participating within a certain thing. But you could also be a guy who's in lodge every single week and then doesn't do anything Masonic his entire life. So people misunderstand that just going and standing in a place but not absorbing the teachings is just you're hanging out at a business meeting or doing something for, like, hanging out with your guys, but it's not quite the same thing.
Right. You know, it's interesting you said that about the having to go some outside of lodge and take the things that are practiced inside of it, outside of it. One of the things that I wrote about a number of years ago was at the closing of a meeting, the master asks the senior warden, Brother Senior Warden, how should Masons meet? And how act, Brother Junior Warden, and he explains how to part. If you take that brief portion of the closing and you look at it a little bit differently, and you look at it like a benediction. If you go to a church and the priest or the pastor gives a benediction based on the sermon that he had that day, and he's sending his flock, no one can see my air quotes, but his flock out to do the work. If you look at that portion of as the same thing, we're telling them to go out and treat everybody equally. We're telling them to go out and stand upright. And we're telling them to always be on the square, on the level, and act by the square of virtue. It's a benediction that we're giving to these Masons at the close of every meeting and suggesting to them how to conduct themselves until we see them again.
Yep.
Wow,
Also,
something just clicked for me there. I'd never thought of it that way, and that is, I got a big old smile on my face as soon as you said that. Like, that is awesome. That is, yeah.
It adds to I'll add a portion on that to my importance of the opening and close. I also talked within that how the opening and close like resynchronizes everyone because they're all in the same place at the same time watching the same thing together.
Right.
And the entire opening and closing is reminding you of all the portions of the degrees. It's in small portions, but it's all placed there with whether it be the modes of recognition, all that stuff. It's, if you're being mindful, it's saying, hey, I know you've been away for a while. Now it's been like a month, we're here. Let's do a quick recap of what our philosophy is quickly. And then, like you said, and then it's like, all right, now we're done. Take it into the world. It's important, and that's why I get kind of, I don't want to say butthurt on a podcast, but I just did. But it makes me a little bit butthurt when I see lodges that treat the opening and closing like a necessary evil, where it's like, all right, let's just do this as fast as possible. Let's not practice any part of it. I don't care if it's the end of the year and I've had a whole year to learn it. I'm not going to do it. It doesn't matter. It's something we have to do because the code says so. That it irks me because it's kind of what helps as a tool to continuously help Masons be Masons. It continuously reestablishes the ideas. It goes, you've been gone a little ways, let's think about it again. Let's think about it again. Through time, you might watch thousands of opening and closings. It's like, yep, keep the repetition going to help support you as a Mason if you can open your mind to it when you're watching it and allow yourself to be reminded of those things too.
That's why I have draw such a line between the words memorize and learn, right? Two completely different things. In Masonry, we tend to talk a lot about memorization. I did it earlier when we talked about the Day of Light. But in reality, what we should be focusing on is learning, right? A good friend and brother, one of the guys that inspired me to become a proficiency man and a ritualist and all those things combined, when he was learning, he told me a story when he was learning the Middle Chamber lecture. He said he sat down to learn that with a dictionary on one side of him, a Bible on the other side, and the ritual in the center. And as he was learning it, he was looking up words in a dictionary and then go and find references in the Bible to the things that they're talking about. And he actually learned it. Right. And be able to explain what it is that he's talking about. And what happens, in my opinion, what happens when you do that, your presentation of that particular lecture, even though you're not going through and explaining who the Ephraimites were and everything else to the candidate in excruciating detail that you would learn while looking at it in the Bible, your tone changes. because now you have a level of understanding, and it really comes out more of a teaching than a lecture.
I think
Does that make sense?
I never thought about that.
That makes total sense.
But I have looked up, we've looked up words, but I've also glanced at various parts in the Bible too, or the Torah, or whatever it might be, to try to find the context of what they're kind of referencing. In like chapter, we were told specifically in some portions to read Kings and Chronicles and a bunch of stuff, but it does add to the confidence in it too.
Right.
Because it doesn't just feel like you're repeating words. You're repeating the words as they should be, but because you actually know what you're talking about, I think that's huge. And it's beneficial to you because you're basically storing in a repository in your mind the teachings that now you understand, not just words that you have to puke on people.
Absolutely.
It's actually really interesting for me to think about that now, because I remember the first time I did like a couple charges. They were just flat. And I always attributed it to the fact that, like, I knew the words, but I still had to think about them.
Sure.
Right? And then as they got better, I said, well, I have to think less about what I'm trying to say. That's why my delivery of this is getting better. But I think it's more what you said, is I started learning it more, and it became, like, internalized. And, I was looking up words and trying to understand what exactly was being said in there and thinking about them on a regular basis and being like, I really got to pay attention to that part, or that word's really important, and I should make sure to throw some emphasis on it so that the candidate understands that that word is really important, that it's there. And yeah, I think that's probably why my delivery of the charges has gotten so much better, and you got to see some of that progression from the first time I did it at a day of light to the last time.
You and I had that conversation early on too, when I first started working with you on the charges, or watching you give the charges or what have you. Just the word charge in and of itself, right? You have to think about what that word means in that context. Once you understand what that word means in that context, that it means a set of instructions, right? If you babysit somebody, if you babysit a child, that child is in your charge, right? Yep. That's what that word means in that context, at least in my opinion anyways. I'm sure there's lots of people that have a different opinion. But when you start thinking about it that way, that those charges are actually a set of instructions. Yep. And then when you realize that the fellowcraft charge builds off of the inner apprentice charge, and the master mason charge builds off of the fellowcraft charge. Now you see all three of these charges as a list of instructions. And if you ever were to sit down and read the ancient charges, puts a whole other spin onto things. And when you, for me anyways, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, when I started to understand that, that's when all this stuff started to click. So when it all started to come together for me. And I by no means am I an expert on this. By no means. There are lots of Masons in Wisconsin that are much more educated on the ritual and have a more in-depth understanding of it than I do. But for me, when it started to click and I started to develop my own understanding of it, is when when that passion for education really kicked in.
And I think that's where it gets fun,
yeah.
too. And within that, I always think it's funny because when we're like, hey, this person knows more about the ritual ABC 1, 2, 3, if you actually pull that thread long enough, you just find another guy who is just making his understanding that could be well thought out through research. But since we don't even technically 100% know where Masonry came from, all we are really working with is opinions of educated brethren who are interpreting to the best of their knowledge based on maybe some historical facts, but they're still extrapolating, they're interpreting and making interpretations on the same texts or similar texts depending on jurisdictional stuff.
Sure.
So when, you're like, hey, if you feel like your opinion is maybe off base, having discussions with those brothers, you might even come to a third understanding. But it is really like one of those things where someone wants to claim they have an absolute authority on Masonry. I go, but we don't even know who necessarily created this, for example, so we don't have anyone to ask what was in their mind when they wrote it. And it was probably collaborative to a certain extent, so it might have been multiple minds that are being pushed into this ritual. So it's really up to the onus of the individual brother to find a way to make it make sense to them and find benefit from it. And there are some opinions that you'd be like, we're right from the Knights Templar, and you're like, probably not. But there's other ones where it's like, oh, but based on the way this is worded, I would assume it's this, where I think there's more credence to something like that, or weight to it.
Well, it's like art interpretation, essentially. Two people are going to look at the same painting and pull different things from it. Same idea.
But Picasso's dead, so you can't ask him what he was in his
Right.
mind. So all you have left to do is let it experience it and see what comes out of it, you know?
Exactly.
Man, eye-opening.
Sometimes Pat'll do that. I've had a lot of eye-opening conversations with Pat where he says something, and sometimes it's just something small, and you sneak it in there, and I'm like, oh man, I never looked at it that way, and you know what? Now it makes sense.
All right, we're running a little long, but I like having Pat on, so we're going to do one more question. And Pat, I'd like to know, what would you say your most memorable experience or lesson gained? Oh my God, I can't type questions. What would you say your most memorable experience is within Freemasonry, or the biggest lesson you've taken away from Freemasonry?
Oh, that's a tough one. My most memorable experience. I conferred a degree a number of years ago. It may have been the first or second entrance degree that I conferred. And I approached it with such, I guess at the time I considered it was professionalism. Very detailed, very, straight, very what have you. And Craig Campbell was Grand Master at the time, and I had invited him to this degree, and he pulls me aside afterwards and he says to me, Pat, that's great that you know the words, and I'm paraphrasing, this isn't exactly what he said, but he said it's great that you memorize the words and everything else, but you need to make it so that the candidate understands what you're saying, and with the inflection and everything else. And I've shaped everything that I've done based on that conversation. So I think that probably applies to both the most memorable because of that conversation, and the thing I learned the most also probably is both. Of course, we see lots of funny things happen at degrees that had someone tell someone to kneel on his naked left breast once. That was kind of funny.
Or the pants fall down.
Yeah, all those things. You bet.
Or I go completely cold on the charge the other night and then start saying the sentence I had already said and stopped and looked at somebody who I had just been sitting next to on the sideline and said, he was like, this has been such a good degree. And I was like, yeah, till I get up there and screw it up. Apparently that was a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I was like 2 paragraphs in and started repeating the end of the second paragraph again. And I'm like,
you're in a time loop.
We're gonna start over. And I looked right at the brother on the sideline and I went, told you I was gonna screw it up.
Awesome. Well, honestly, I think the brother and I have a lot to look forward to in this episode. And if they've reached this point, they're probably going, yeah, Andrew was right already. But I'd like to thank you for coming on. And we're going to do some news and events.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about some news. What's been going on in Wisconsin? So, James Hayes Lodge has celebrated their centennial dinner celebration, 100 years of Freemasonry. The lodge was actually chartered in 1923. There's a variety of very interesting members who founded that lodge, some within Lafayette and some other lodges in the area. There's been many members of Hayes Lodge who are actually also members of Lafayette Lodge, so that's kind of where they got their start, was from Masons coming from that lodge, forming Hayes Lodge. Grandmaster Jason Landon issued a dispensation for a new lodge in March of 1923. The Grand Lodge issued its charter to James Hayes Lodge in June of that year. When the lodge was founded, it had 72 members. So congratulations to James Hayes Lodge for 100 years of Freemasonry.
All right, and also in news, Brother Frank McKenna pulled together a special program on November 10th for the Masonic veterans at the 3 Pillars, which was presented in the chapel. They did a Pledge of Allegiance, toast to the flag, was given by 3 different brothers, it seems like, and they also did a presentation on the importance of the folding of the flag for our Masonic veterans that live there and their ladies. And it seemed like it, looking at the picture, was well attended, and that's pretty awesome actually. It looks like the program concluded with taps.
Yep, and it looks like there's some toasts.
Yep. It's a pretty cool event for Brother Frank to put together.
Yeah, it sounds like, they did a remembrance and benediction for all the sacrifices and hard works of our, hardworking veterans. So thank you to our veterans, and it's awesome that we put on that event over at Three Pillars.
Always got to be honoring our veterans.
Cool. Let's talk about some events. We got a lot going on. We're still within the throes of installation season. So the first installation we have here on December 15th, West Dallas Lodge number 291 is doing their installation of officers. On the 16th of December, Lake Lodge 29 is doing our Breakfast with Santa event. Santa's going to be there, guys, for real. The real Santa's there. It's going to be awesome. It's from 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. It's free, no money. You just come and get food. Free and open to the public, and that's going to be at Lake Masonic Center. Also on the 16th, George Washington Lodge, 1776, number 337, is doing their installation of officers. That starts at 1 p.m. On the 16th as well. 16th, busy day in Masonry. You could do Masonry all day.
All day.
Oregon Lodge, number 151, is doing their installation of officers, and that'll be at noon. Also on the 16th of December, Waukesha Lodge, number 37, is doing, guess what? Their installation of officers, but this one's at 6 p.m. So you could go to one installation in the afternoon, and then you could go over to Waukesha for another one. And that's going to be at the Waukesha Lodge. It's going to be on 317 South Street in Waukesha. Basically, they're going to have their installation at 6. When you're done with that, they're going to have some cocktails from 7 to 7:30 at Let It Be, which is on Clinton Street. Then from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m., they'll have dinner and entertainment. The attire is going to be ugly Christmas sweaters. You can RSVP on their website. You can look that up in the journal as well. On the 16th as well, we have Burlington Lodge is doing their installation. It's going to be at 3:33 p.m. I know there's going to be some dinner afterward and some good stuff, so we're checking out in Burlington. Guess what? Also on the 16th of December, we have the District 7 Joint Open Installation, which is going to be at the Wisconsin Masonic Center. It's going to be at 2:30 p.m. The rehearsal for the officers to be installed will be in the auditorium. It's going to be at 3 p.m. Installation begins at 5:30 p.m. And there will be a banquet afterwards at Viva Italia. I thought that'd sound cooler.
Do you want to re-record that?
Viva Italia, the Italian buffet. It's going to be $32 adults, $10 for kids. Come and check it out. On December 17th, we're finally out of the 16th. Next day, Ozaki Lodge, number 17, is doing, guess what? Their installation of officers. It's going to be at 3 p.m. There's going to be a pasta bar afterwards. Please RSVP with Master Rick Schroeder by December 12th. His email is papabear at something. All right, you guys can look that up later. On the 19th, Milton Lodge, number 161, is doing, wait for it, their installation of officers at 6:30 p.m. Welcome to installation season. Matt, what's going on in January?
All right, well, surprise, surprise. We're going to start off January with January 4th. Wauwatosa Lodge has their installation of officers at 7 p.m. Also on the 4th, Wisconsin Lodge number 13 has their installation of officers at 6 p.m. On the 6th, South Shore number 3 will be doing their installation of officers at the Lake Masonic Center. On the 8th, James M. Hayes Lodge number 331 will be doing their installation at 7 p.m. Also on the 8th, Janesville Western Star Lodge number 55 will be doing their installation officers at 6 p.m. On January 11th, Lake Lodge at their stated meeting is going to be holding an Order of the Rusty Nail. Dinner is at 6, meeting starts at 7.
And if you know anyone, guys, that hasn't been to Lodge in a while, send them over to Lake to watch a Rusty Nail, and, they can always go back to their mother lodges after that, but it's a good recap, so a great opportunity to get re-engaged with Masonry. So if you know anyone, please send them our way.
And then on January 13th, we have, guess what? Another installation of officers. This one is for Damascus Lodge number 290. It's not just a number, it's a goal. I'll plug that for him. And then on January 25th, Lake Lodge is having its 22nd annual Robert Burns Table Lodge. Starts at 6, goes till about 9. Ceremonial toasts, haggis, roast beef, good eats. Our guest speaker is going to be past Grandmaster Paul Torval. It's $35 a person. Your reservations are due by January 18th. Please send checks to the Lake Masonic Center. Or talk to one of us and you can pay in cash.
Yep, that'll work, and potentially we might have a digital payment in the future. If that does happen, we will let you know ASAP.
For sure.
But in the meantime, send your checks our way.
Speaking of digital things, make sure you are following us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And if you want to reach out to us via email, Andrew, that email address is
timeforfellowship@gmail.com.
You guys all have a great day.
Thanks for stopping in. Thanks a lot for being here, Pat, and till next time when we are back for fellowship.